We're here to talk about resilience, and you all have been maybe coming to our webinars since January. Maybe this is the first one you've been at. I just want to remind folks, this is the work we're working on. Uh, you remember our image here of the boat. We as a species and as creation are getting rocked by the changes in our climate and the consequences of those changes. And we are using a definition that the Urban Sustainability Directors Network has developed called uh, that resilience hubs are trusted, community-led facilities that enhance the well-being of communities before, during, and after disruption. And the size and scale of these can be dramatically different. They might be as big as an aircraft carrier or a giant floating island, or they might be small, little communities on just a small little boat that's operative, and each has their different opportunities. We are working on the small, trusted, local corner store size resilience hubs that are possible by operational, and they depend on these partnerships. In this conference I'm at today, I heard from Dr. Heidi Roop, of the head of the Climate Adaptation Partnership at the University of Minnesota. She said preparedness is made possible by partnerships. And that's the key to these, is that we build communities where there are trusted relationships, so people trust that they can participate with us in times of weather disruption. Just a reminder, we use some of the key concepts of the USDN, the 5 pillars: programs and services, communications, operations, buildings and landscapes, and power. We're going to talk about those last 2 pillars tonight. And that those are activated in normal everyday times, during disruption, and in recovery periods from disruptions. If you put those 5 pillars in a grid with those 3 modes of operation, you get a nice matrix that can help guide you in how to build a strategy for operationalizing these resilience hubs. And that's what we're doing. We're working with you through these webinars to deliver these concepts so we can begin getting this in the water of the way we think in our congregations. We use this 7-step plan, also provided by the USDN. We trust that following these steps will guide congregations to find the right mix at their location for operationalizing these resilience hubs. And we're working particularly with 10 locations in a community of practice to test these out. So in these webinars, we're talking about these concepts, but with our community of practice, we're actually implementing them and putting them into practice and learning from one another and what that means. We meet monthly. We're meeting monthly from September through May. We are sharing our experiences with one another, whether those are good or obstacles and challenges. We're getting targeted resources to help funding for operationalizing these and implementing these things. These sites are from a variety of areas around Minnesota, and they represent a variety of perspectives too. We try to bring a lot of different perspectives to the table. We hope that in May, June, we'll be able to deliver a kind of a recipe book that other congregations can follow. Yep.
Damn, I'm on a
Yeah.
call right now. It's working for me.
We got a few more people coming in. Hold on just a minute. We hope that by May of next year, or June of next year, we'll be able to hand out a recipe book of kind of a step-by-step guide for how congregations can implement a resilience hub in their location. And we'll continue to work with you if you are interested in our resources. We hope to support, hundreds, if not thousands of resilience hubs across the state in the coming years. Tonight, we want to talk about how we can improve how we make and get energy, how we store energy, and how we use energy. Again, just to reiterate, we aren't going to go as in-depth as possibly could be gone in depth to all these topics, but we're going to hit some important information for your location. If you are interested in a deeper dive into some of these utility issues, we've got a webinar coming up this Thursday. Again, we record all our webinars. You can access them on our YouTube channel. We have the fortune of having an intern working with us, a teaching assistant with our executive director. His name is Ben Codris O'Brien. He's doing a doctoral dissertation on the history of utilities in the U.S., and he'll be joining us on that Thursday, and we may be doing a dedicated webinar about the larger context of utilities throughout the US. But when we think in general about how we make and get our energy, the history of that over the last century has been marked largely by centralization, by prioritizing reliability at maybe the expense of some other values. And we've decided that a regulated monopoly is probably the best way to deliver that. In Minnesota, you can search on those utilities. You can see a map of our state here. This is provided by our Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. I'll drop links to these in the chat a little later. But you can see that the state is divided up into a variety of public utility service areas. In our Twin Cities area, the largest provider and serving most of the Twin Cities metro is Xcel. And Xcel serves the most customers by volume throughout the state. So it's one that we often talk about. Because of that, because it serves so many customers, it often drives decisions at the Public Utilities Commission. And so it's one that we often pay attention to. You can also find a map of all the power plants across the state that generate power. If you click on any of these red dots, when you go to this map, it'll give you the name of the power plant. It'll give you some details about it, such as how much maximum capacity generation it has, what kind of fuel it uses, all of that. But the point to make here is you can see how centralized these power plants are. It may look like there is a lot across the state, but you can imagine the millions of customers that are served by these power plants. And when you think about that and the variety of total production by these power plants, you can see that it's a very centralized system that relies on a grid of electrical wires and whatnot to conduct that electricity all the way down the line to the different users. You can also find a map of renewable energy that's developed in our state. Again, this would be an example of the centralized renewable energy that's developed. So these are large, megawatt, multi-megawatt productions. Again, this is applying renewable, but on a centralized system. So what we want to talk about tonight is how might we make a more robust, resilient energy grid? And one of the main ways to do that is by installing solar on your local facility. And I'm only going to talk about a very small piece of that puzzle tonight. I'm going to talk about what is happening in the next 8 weeks that impacts your facility and your opportunity. A law was passed, as you might know, in July of this year, and it sets in law new rules on January 1. And those new rules are going to change the incentive from the federal government that's available to people for solar. For homeowners, you actually have to have your system completed. For commercial, including nonprofits and faith communities, you can make a different choice that isn't actually completing construction. But if you don't make that choice within the next 8 weeks, you stand to lose thousands of dollars. So that's why we've been beating this drum. Maybe you've already heard, seen emails from us. We're really trying to get as many people to go solar as possible. That benefit for commercial projects, including nonprofits and uh, faith communities, is a 30% payment of the cost of your solar system from the federal government. Again, house systems have to be installed and finished by the end of the year, but businesses and nonprofits can pay 10% of the cost of the solar system and hold on to that 30% tax credit. You don't need to finish installation until at least the end of 2027 and maybe even as far out as 2029. So just by paying the 10% of the cost of the solar system, you lock in that 30% payment back from the federal government. So again, we can't really help homeowners at this stage, but we can help faith communities and nonprofits and small businesses. Just as a reminder, a solar system is a collection of solar panels. In this kind of application, we're talking about it being installed on your roof or at your facility. And this dramatically democratizes energy production. Instead of that centralized system, that coal-fired plant or that natural gas plant or even that solar array out in the cornfield that's way far away from your facility, this is energy production, energy generation right on your rooftop. It flows right into your building. And if you produce more than you need, it flows out onto the grid and goes right into the next neighbor down the street who needs that electricity. So I give this slide a little bit tongue in cheek, but it really does kind of dramatize the opportunity that's before us. Do you want to get free electricity from the natural systems of the planet, from our sun? Or do you want to depend on the monopoly utility that centralizes power and money and efforts? Minnesota Power up in the northern part of the state was just bought out by BlackRock, which is a private equity company. And, that means that's a telltale sign that energy is becoming more lucrative and a better place for investment. But it also means that the small person, the small entity might lose out. So by buying solar, you democratize your energy production and make it local to you. This is a list of values that are expressed by going with different energy generation. Right now, Xcel Energy is 50% renewable. Other utilities have similar or maybe less than percentage renewable. If you produce rooftop solar, you have the potential to produce all your electricity by renewable means. You're local, you're using a Minnesota-owned solar installer company, you're prioritizing your concerns, you have the potential to become more resilient with battery storage. We're going to talk about that tonight. And you're going to reduce the demand on the grid. You reduce the amount of wiring and whatnot that has to be used to transport all that energy. There's three main values that come to you as a location that implements PV solar on your roof, photovoltaic solar, integrity, protection, and savings. Now, we all know that climate change is happening, that it's happening in a way that causes a lot of damage to our society and to our relationship with the earth. And this is one of the ways, it's not always the best way, but it is the best way for many people to respond to that and to draw down our carbon emissions. These statistics come from our partner, the Citizens Utility Board. We are seeing, at least in Xcel territory, a rise in electricity rates. I'm not as familiar with other parts of the state, but Xcel is increasing our rates and they want to keep increasing it more and more. While they're doing that, they're getting a little bit harsher about who they dump off of their rolls and cut their service under certain situations. In 2024, they disconnected service for more than 52,000 households in their service area. So By going solar, you protect yourself a little bit from those increasing rates. And with battery storage, you can protect yourself from energy outages. So financially, this looks like three primary benefits to faith communities and nonprofits. You create your own electricity, so you're avoiding those costs to Excel. And if you create more electricity than you use, you get paid for that at the retail rate in Excel territory. Other utilities also pay you. They may not pay you at the retail rate. It depends on your service area. You also get a utility incentive over and above that. And depending on what city you live in, you might get an incentive payment uh, in addition from your city. And then the big one that we're talking about that's going away is the federal tax credit. So imagine if your solar system costs $100,000, you're going to get a check from the federal government for $30,000 or $40,000 if you have domestic content at a high enough rate in your system. So those are big incentives, big opportunities. And the biggest one there is that number three, the federal tax credit. Depreciation at the federal and state level is available to businesses, LLCs, and whatnot, not available to nonprofits and faith communities. So the way this typically looks for the finances, in your first year, your costs are high. You've bought your system, it costs thousands of dollars. You might have to pay a little bit in maintenance, and you may increase your premiums on your insurance uh, a little bit of a few $100s for the year. You might have to take out a loan to buy the system, and so those are your costs, and they weigh heavy and balance the scale against you. But over time, you start saving and you get income from your solar installation, and that begins to balance out. Typically in year 10, you balance out those costs and your savings outweigh the costs that you've put in. And at 10 years is an average. Sometimes you can get less than that, 8 years maybe. Sometimes it's a little bit more, 11 or 12. But that's the average that we're seeing. There's two ways you can do this. So even if you don't have money up front to buy a system, you can pay zero and an investor will buy that system for you and give you a 10% discount on the electricity you buy from that investor. So the electricity off the solar system will be sold to you at a discount over what you would pay Excel. There's a lot of different machinations here for this, depending on your values and your goals. We can work with you. We have investors. We have this developed. We can help you. So I'm not going to go into deep detail on each of these. I will just tell you that when we send the recording of this webinar, we will provide you all these samples, and you can dig deep into the look of how the finances work on the typical systems. This is a sample system. You can see that if you can buy the system up front, you're going to save $200,000 over the 30-year life of the array. That's a pretty good profit on $150,000 over 30 years. If you don't have the money and you want to pay zero, the savings will work out for you. You'll still save, more than $150,000 over the course of the life of the system. And if you can pay a little bit up front, then you'll get close to saving as much as if you can buy the array directly. So again, I don't want to take up a lot of time in this webinar because I want to preference a lot of the good information we're going to get from our guests. But these samples will be sent out to you, and you can see them and dig into the numbers. So the final action step for you is if you know a nonprofit or if your faith community hasn't explored solar, it's easy to do. I just need copies of 12 months of electric bills. You can download these from your utility online account, or if you're using paper bills, you can scan those, or I can pick them up from you. We do need the actual bills. A usage report is not sufficient to get the information that we need. And it's helpful to have some information about the quality of your roof and how long you expect that roof to last. You just send those to me at this email address, and I'll get you a 30-year comprehensive proposal. It'll show the design of the system on your roof. It'll tell you exactly how much electricity that's going to produce, and we'll map it out for 30 years, exactly the savings and the incentives and everything. And you'll be able to work with your leadership at your faith community or with your nonprofit to decide if this is a good fit for your facility. Just before I hand it over to our guests, I just want to point out we've done a lot of systems in different parts of the state. We have good partners. We can do this with your faith community. It can seem opaque and complicated, but there is a recipe. We've done about 32 systems now with nonprofits and small businesses and faith communities all across Minnesota. And we'd love to help you. So just ask your office administrator for those bills and email them to me, and I'll be glad to work with you to help you get a design and a proposal. We are saying about the end of November. So 1st of December is probably the latest we can work with you and still be able to get across the finish line. So it is important to work. November is going to be your month to make it happen. Thanks. I hope that was helpful. I would like to turn it over to our one of our guests, Cecelia Hartigan from Apadana Energy. She's going to talk to us about what you can do with all that solar electricity that you produce.
Yeah. Hi, guys. I'm Cece. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Let me know if you guys can see this.
Thanks. Yep, we're seeing it.
Okay. All right. So there will be quite a bit of info here, but I'm just gonna go through it at a higher level. And hopefully it's helpful. But I'm gonna cover battery energy storage systems. There are many use cases. The most common ones that you may have heard of are emergency backup. So this is installing battery storage so that during a grid outage, you can still power loads in your home or business. This means that solar will also continue to remain powered during outages. And this is typically the most robust and most expensive system because emergency backup, you typically want it to last for a few hours. And the longer you need backup or the more loads you need backed up, the more expensive the best solution will be. And then there's the second use case, self-consumption. And this is going to be probably the most optimal solution for customers financially. This will typically be a smaller battery size than emergency backup. And this is when paired with solar, you prioritize offsetting your loads with solar, and then excess is used to charge the batteries. And then BESS will discharge to power load when solar is insufficient or not present. This maximizes the kilowatt hour value of all solar production because rather than selling to the grid or clipping or not using it, you're consuming all production from your system on site. And then any excess beyond that, you can sell to the grid. And then we've got demand shifting is another use case that's more common with commercial customers. And this is done by sizing battery storage to reduce or completely eliminate the peak demand charge each month. So this is typically a large percentage of a commercial customer's bill is their demand charges. And if you have battery storage on site, you can program the battery to discharge during that peak demand event. And this will reduce your utility costs greatly. You can couple this with self-consumption explained in the last slide and use both parameters to dictate the final sizing. This is typically going to be the best case for commercial customers in terms of their financial payback. And then rate arbitrage is one that is not necessarily as prevalent in Minnesota right now. But if you were to look into other states' utilities, California is kind of the leader in the country, and they have gone to time-based rate schedules, meaning, say, from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., electricity is really expensive, and then overnight it's really cheap. It actually does vary. In California, it's actually from like 2 p.m. to 9 p.m., it's really expensive. And then 9 p.m. to 9 a.m., super cheap. And then 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., it's in the middle. And so if you have battery storage, what you can do in this setup is save solar that's produced during these lower rate periods and then discharge during the higher rate periods, and you have a revenue center there. So this is going to be more common as Minnesota changes to time of use rates, which is coming. We're not sure when, but it will. That's why they've installed the smart meters at most customers' residences or buildings now, so that they can have more control over their billing. And this, we would have to look at, detailed interval data to size that. But this is a very attractive and attractive opportunity for people as we move into time of use charges here. And then this use case is probably the most relevant to the resiliency hubs. And it's taking a little bit of all the above use cases, or specifically one, and then designing a microgrid system. And a microgrid is basically a large power grid that's isolated from the utility. Well, it doesn't have to be large, but a power grid isolated from the utility, so that when the grid goes out, these homes and facilities still get power. And this can be any combination of generation, solar, wind. You could have a generator, you could have EV chargers, but this battery storage, energy storage is really critical for the microgrid. Because without the microgrid, when the grid goes down, none of these items except the generator will be powered. And generator is more expensive because it's fuel. Solar you pay for once and then it's free for the rest of its life. And I think that this diagram is pretty helpful in understanding that the microgrid not only isolates from the utility, but it controls all of these sources of generation and takes care of distributing to the homes and facilities tied into this microgrid. And this can be done from a very small scale to a super large scale. We've worked on, entire tribal communities being powered by a microgrid. We've also installed and worked on, a single family home with its own microgrid. So this is really the future of power in the United States. And this is how we're going to get through our grid challenges that we're starting to see in some states. And then I thought I would just highlight a few key terms that come up when talking about battery storage. There's two different types, well, many more types, but two main types of technologies, AC coupling versus DC coupling. And so AC coupling involves a separate solar inverter and a separate battery inverter. And in DC coupled setups, you have one inverter, which is a hybrid inverter that can take both the battery and the solar DC electricity and convert it to AC. DC coupled is more efficient because there's less conversions, where in an AC coupled system, the solar has to convert to AC and then back to DC to be stored in the battery, and vice versa with the battery stored energy. So that's the hybrid inverter, and these are newer in the market. There's a number of options, but they're still pretty expensive compared to a normal solar inverter. But if you think about the cost of adding storage later on, if you've done a hybrid inverter up front, it's going to be a lot cheaper and a lot more simple. With AC coupled systems, you need two complete sets of inversion equipment. So that's just the difference there. There are pros and cons to both. And there are cases where AC coupled makes more sense and cases where DC coupled makes more sense. And I'll get into that in a little bit. And then one of the key components in a microgrid or PV plus BESS or just BESS system is the gateway, or the microgrid interconnection device, which is referred to as the MID. And this is the central hub that integrates all the power sources, ensuring seamless transfer and system stability. This device is going to isolate that microgrid from the grid and keep all loads powered and all generation sources on and working. The MIDs available on the market contribute to a lot of constraints when it comes to installing this equipment, but I'll also highlight that a little more later on. And then hours of autonomy is just the duration a battery system can provide backup to a specific customer or specific loads. Here, I just have a brief diagram showing an AC coupled system. You'll see it has 2 inverters. There's going to be a power conversion from DC to AC here and a power conversion from DC to AC here. If this solar wants to go back into the battery, we have to convert it again from AC to DC. Here, we have our battery and our solar. If we want solar to go to the batteries, it just goes straight through this hybrid inverter with no conversion, because batteries need DC and solar is DC before the inverter. And then if the battery needs to discharge, it simply comes here and converts to AC to power the home or go to the grid. These 2 types of systems make up, the options that are available when it comes to adding storage to a PV system. And then I just have this slide showing autonomy can vary greatly depending on the month of the year. If you have the highest loads in January, you're only going to get 2 hours of autonomy then. But if you have the same amount of battery backup in, say, May, when your loads are less, you could get over 13 hours of autonomy. Having battery backup, you can, decrease or increase the hours of autonomy available by increasing or decreasing your load, if that makes sense. So if you know the grid has gone out, you turn off X, Y, and Z, the largest, the largest appliances, and this could go from 2 to 4 or even 6. But this is just knowing your load profile and your patterns to have realistic expectations with the system. And then there are 2 different types of backup systems. There's partial and whole site backup systems. And partial provides backup for a subset of loads on site, typically critical or emergency loads. Lights, Wi-Fi, heat, refrigeration, security, etc. This involves isolating a backup panel from the main electrical system, and this panel will remain powered during an outage, and all solar tied to this panel will also remain on and producing, which would extend the autonomy for these critical loads. This requires installing a new subpanel, relocating those critical loads, analyzing their usage, and then sizing the best based on the use case of that customer. And this is what a partial site backup would look like. You'll have the grid, your meter, your main electrical system and panel, and then this is where your MID or gateway is going to go. You'd have your backup loads panel, your battery, and then your solar. And this is also an AC coupled system. The battery here has an inverter in it that takes it from DC to AC, and then the solar has its own separate third-party inverter. And then whole site backup is a bit more robust. It's going to provide backup for all loads on site. So we have to isolate the entire electrical system from the grid in a single point. This means that the gateway or MID needs to be placed before any loads on site. The entire site will remain powered during outages, and all solar tied to the site will remain on and producing to extend the autonomy. This requires installing new service equipment, installation of transfer switch, typically several disconnecting means. We've got to do detailed analysis of loads and then size based on the peak load to be supported without grid supply. Whoops. Okay, so this is whole site backup. The gateway is going to be the first thing after the meter. And then all loads will come after that gateway with all distributed energy resources as well. And often how we'll do this is we won't tie the solar and battery to the panel, but we will tie it into the gateway. This avoids some constraints that I won't get into here. But this gateway is providing what I described as microgrid controls. It's isolating from the grid. It's monitoring the home loads. It's seeing the battery state of charge, the solar production or lack thereof. And it's prioritizing what to do with all that electricity based on the use case the customer is looking for. So then I just have this slide to show some basic options. So if solar exists, then you're going to be AC coupling because you already have this solar inverter. You could replace it with a hybrid, but that doesn't make sense financially, especially if you've still got a lot of life left in your solar inverter. If there is no solar and it's to be installed with the BESS, then we need to DC couple. Well, we don't have to DC couple, but it's probably going to be the better, more financially attractive solution because with a DC coupled system, you've got one hybrid inverter. Yes, it's more expensive than this solar inverter, but it's about the same as the battery inverter and the solar inverter. You need less equipment here. You'll have a more efficient system. And this DC coupled setup is also a really good idea if you're thinking you'll ever add storage or PV in the future. Which brings us to here. If you're doing standalone BESS, you can certainly AC couple it. I would recommend that unless you know you're going to add solar in the future, or maybe you will, then you should DC couple and install a hybrid inverter. We've installed several systems that use hybrid inverters with just solar, and then they have the option to go add batteries much simpler and for much less money because we've installed the hybrid inverter in that system. And then another main item that dictates our options is because this technology is newer, what is actually available in the market and certified for use in the US. And the voltage of the service is going to dictate a lot of those options. So if you're single phase 120, 240, you've got the Tesla, the Enphase, Solarc, Franklin Whole Home, and many other residential products for battery storage. These are all fairly similar. They're mostly AC coupled, except for Tesla's new Powerwall's DC coupled, and then the Solarc is DC coupled. And these are all rated up to 200 amps, which I'll get to that in a minute also. So there's many options here for single phase. But then we get into three phase, and if you have 480, 277 volts on your service, you've got a few more options. Solarc has a 60K inverter that works at this voltage. There's Schneider hybrid inverters. SMA and Sungrow both have hybrid and AC coupled options, among other manufacturers. But then this 208, 120 volt tier is where the options become very limited. There's a 30K Solarc, a brand called EG4 has some options for this. And then a company called Solus has a hybrid inverter here too, but it's not certified for installation here yet. So those are just some, main questions that we're going to ask up front.
Okay.
And then
Interrupt just a minute, Cece.
Yep.
Just can you explain a little bit about the difference in the three phase and single phase and how a person might know which is their service voltage?
Yeah, so most residential homes are going to be single phase 120, 240. And then most like small to medium commercial buildings are going to be 208, 120. Most apartment buildings we work with are 208. Most churches are also 208. And then big, large manufacturing facilities or, sites that use a lot of power are going to be at this higher voltage here. There is a way to know if you look at your main service panel, it'll have a voltage in the nameplate rating. and that should let you know. Also, the meter might say 3-phase on it or 1-phase, and that can indicate. But I can send. I've got a diagram that I've made in the past that I'll share with you, Buff, after this, and it helps people figure out what service voltage they have.
Great. And then for folks that have inverters,
Yeah. So
how do those work with the two options you've kind of shown us with them?
yeah, so microinverters are typically going to be N-phase or AP, there's others, but if you have N-phase microinverters, you most likely have a single phase system. They just recently came out with 3-phase micros. And in that case, you would want to go with the N-phase battery system. They don't have a 3-phase version yet, but
And would that be a hybrid inverter then, or?
N-phase is AC coupled. This is because, let me see if I can explain this well. So the microinverters themselves are solar inverters, and they're underneath each panel. So for N-phase to have a DC coupled version, they'd have to scratch their micros and use a string inverter, if that makes sense.
Yes.
The microinverters are doing that conversion to AC here, but then the N-phase battery actually has, I think, 6 of those microinverters in the top of it. And those micros there are doing the conversion for the battery power. So it's AC coupled, but I would recommend to stay with Enphase. Their AC coupled battery is a really good product. And they did also just come out with a new generation, which is really awesome. So I don't know if that's the best answer, Buff, but microinverters certainly can work with battery storage. We may be a little more limited into what we have available, but with the Enphase battery system available, there's certainly a solution there.
Thanks. Thanks for picking up those questions as part of your talk there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then I just wanted to talk about some constraints. So if you've got an existing PV system, your AC coupling capability is limited to the battery product's maximum kilowatt AC of PVs. This is kind of confusing, I know, but when you AC couple PV to a battery, there's more often than not a limit on the amount of PV that you can couple to that battery. And that's done to prevent overloading of the batteries. And it can impact system sizing a lot. You might need one 15 kilowatt hour battery, but then your solar is twice what's allowed to be connected to that battery, and then you need 2. This can be a pain. We can work around it by separating the PV system if needed. But then that can impact interconnection agreements and any incentives you're getting. So it's definitely not impossible, and it often works out well, the ratios. But there are times where the solar is just way bigger than what the battery need of the customer can handle. And in that case, we typically would want them, if it makes sense, to wait for their solar rewards or whatever to run out, or be that agreement to end, and then they can come back and look at this then. There's definitely many options, but there are times where this can be a big constraint. And then again, if you have existing PV, it can just limit the compatible solutions available. Not a huge problem, as many of these solutions I listed here can take any third-party solar, but it's just something that we have to think about. And then another constraint is the service size to be backed up. So when I was discussing the MID, the gateway, most of them are only rated to 200 amps. So if you had a 400 amp service you wanted to back up, you would need 2 MIDs. The single phase residential systems are not built well for this. And it would literally be 2 separate 200 amp backup systems. This can become expensive. We have to install, 2 sets of interconnection equipment, or 1 set rated to a large system size. We can also use a solar or a hybrid inverter and stack them to meet the amperage needed, which can also get really expensive depending on the size of the service. But we can mitigate this by considering partial backup, and that can really cut down costs for a customer. And then these are just some basic incentives that are available right now in Minnesota for battery storage projects. In Excel territory, you can get up to $5,000, $175 per kilowatt hour. And then outside of Excel, you can get up to $7,000. And these are capped on battery system size to a maximum of 50 kilowatt hours. You can get the 30% ITC, though I do need to refresh on how that's changing going forward. I think residential, it's out of the picture this year, but commercial, I'm not sure how battery is impacted, but I can follow up with that info. And then this is just an example of sizing. I won't go through it in too much depth, but if you can find the largest single load that you want backed up, and then your battery unit's power capability, you can just take that largest load divided by the battery power, and you need 2 batteries. And then for a second parameter, you take the number of hours that peak load needs to be powered and divide that by the energy storage capacity of the battery. And then you're going to get that you need 3 batteries instead of 2. And then you're going to have to take the largest of these, and that gives you your rough estimate of battery units. And with interval data or load analysis, this will adjust somewhat, but this is a pretty good rule of thumb to make sure you're sizing it correctly. And then I thought I would just go through, this is an example of a customer we have who has installed a whole site microgrid. It includes solar and battery storage, as well as a natural gas generator that was existing on site. And this was their peak demand per month. So they had a max demand of 70 kilowatts in February. And this is just it in table version. 70 here is the max in the winter. And then with our solar and battery storage, we can produce this graph here. The black line is usage. The orange is solar production. And then the gray line here is your usage from the grid post solar and battery storage. So the green line here shows batteries charging and discharging. Here you'll see that the batteries are discharging to meet this load. And then once solar comes on, it's going to start to charge the batteries here. And then excess battery will discharge to cover the load when solar goes away. And you'll see that the usage from the grid is essentially zeroed from 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. with minimal usage from the grid here. And this is just the impact of having solar and battery storage on site in March. And then this is the same graph, but in April. You see energy usage from the grid is completely zeroed out on April 25th. The batteries discharge to meet the load, and then the solar meets the load and charges batteries. And then at night, the batteries kick in again. Again, May 25th, grid demand is completely zeroed. The solar is charging the batteries and meeting the load, and then the batteries are covering the load. Same exact graph again in June, 0 from the grid versus the original demand from the grid. And then this is just an example of the demand reduction that this customer will see. And it's a pretty big impact, especially considering demand on this specific customer's bill was around 60% of their cost. And then that is getting towards the end of my slide deck. But I did want to just highlight some of the more common products that are available. This is the older generation of Enphase, the 5P. We've installed a few of these. They're pretty nice, but then the 4th generation is new and it doesn't require this IQ system controller. The IQ system controller is the MID in the Enphase environment, but they have compressed that product into the Combiner 6C, which is really awesome and can save a good amount of money. So this, I think, is going to be, the standard for AC coupled residential going forward, or single phase AC coupled. But it's a really good system, and they've also made this 4th generation battery significantly smaller, its physical footprint, than the 3rd generation, which is really awesome for homeowners who might not have as much room. And then there's the Tesla Powerwall 3, which can be DC coupled or AC coupled. This is that limit I was talking about with AC coupling solar to a battery. When you DC couple, you could install 20 kilowatts, but if you're AC coupling, you're constrained to 7.68 for the Tesla Powerwall 3 specifically. Other products have different ratios, but they're pretty similar. And then I'll skip this stuff. This is a good how I was explaining before that the service size can be a constraint for battery storage. If you have a 400 amp service, you need 2 Tesla battery systems separate from each other. And then that's where this Solarc product line becomes really awesome, in that you can stack them. So each one's 200 amps. We could parallel 4 of them for 800 amps, or 3 of them for 600, 2 for 400, etc. This is a hybrid inverter, and it would be a DC coupled system. And then now the Solarc 30K is an awesome hybrid inverter for 3-phase 208 volt. Again, we can stack these in parallel to exceed 200 amps. And this is pretty much the bread and butter of 208 volt commercial right now. There are not many other products available that can do this at this voltage. And then similarly, the 60K, which is just for that higher 3-phase tier, 480 volts, parallel systems. We are installing 2 pretty large Solarc 60K systems right now. And it's really cool how flexible that product is and what you can do with it. And I think that's all I've got for you guys.
That's great. Thank you so much, Cecelia. Before we move on to our second guest, I want to just ask, there is a fairly simple question in the chat. Is there a big difference between energy production between microinverters and string inverters?
Yeah, okay. So this is a really good question. It depends. If you've got a roof that is relatively unobstructed, as a common azimuth or orientation of all your panels, a string inverter is going to produce a comparable amount than microinverters. At Apadana, for all residentials or pitched roofs, if it makes sense financially, we will propose microinverters, because once you have different orientations to the sun, or different tilt degrees, or partial shading, if one panel in a string inverter is shaded, it will shut down production of that entire string. So that's why we like micros better there. We think they are better at producing in our environment, in our climate and region. But if it's a flat roof with one angle of tilt and one orientation to the sun, a string inverter is going to be a lot cheaper and going to do the same job in terms of production. So it does depend on the specific building and site, but
Unless they're using optimizers with solar edge
Yeah.
inverter.
Yep. And then we do use solar edge inverters with optimizers. That's a very good point. I'll revise my answer a little bit. When you get into the bigger commercial systems, a microinverter is going to be more expensive than a string inverter. It's going to also be more expensive than solar edge with power optimizers. So that is, if we do have a flat roof that's got shading or it has different orientations to the sun, we're definitely going to go with solar edge with optimizers because it'll be the same as Enphase at a better price point for them. If it's a smaller system, we might say Enphase if the voltage works. And then if it's a really large system with no obstructions, one azimuth and one tilt, that's when we're going to start using the more robust, larger string inverters that don't have optimizers. But in general, microinverters are the best. It's just, you got to weigh the cost of them. Yeah, I mean, I love microinverters. I think they're awesome, but
Well, thank you, Cecelia. And for those of you who are on the call, you're on a green team at a congregation, or you care about a nonprofit and you want to help them explore battery storage, you can call me, you can email me. Cecelia, you can tell, is the brains and knows all the information about it. We work with them we work with Apadana, similar to the way we work with them for solar. However, it's a little bit more sophisticated information that's needed. I sometimes come out and get that, but we'll work with you to get the information we need from you to give you a good recommendation on what a battery system would look like for your facility.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to talk to anyone who's interested in batteries. It's always fun to speak to engaged people. Buff, can I quickly answer one more question in here?
Yeah, please do. And then we'll move on to Jeremy.
I mentioned standalone battery storage very briefly, and I didn't describe it really. When I say standalone, I mean no solar on site, just battery storage. This can be done to accomplish emergency backup. You'd have to charge that battery from the grid for it to provide backup when the grid goes down. Another use case of standalone battery storage is that rate arbitrage that I discussed briefly. If you have just a battery, you can charge it during cheap periods of electricity and discharge during expensive. But that's it. That's all from me. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, I hope you'll be on, and we'll see if there's a little time at the end in case other questions come up during Jeremy's talk.
Yeah, for sure. I'll be here.
Okay, great. Well, so we've heard about some information about energy generation, now some information about energy storage, and I'd like to welcome Jeremy Davis from MNIPL Energy on to talk about energy usage.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. Thank you, CC. That was really informative. I really appreciate it. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. I'll try to go through them, but relatively quickly. Can people see the slides now?
Thanks. Yes, we've seen them.
Okay, excellent. So we'll go through. There's a few things that I wanted to cover, but I wanted to give a quick introduction to MNIPL, who we are, what we do. So, we are an energy efficiency contractor. Our goal is to impact climate change by helping to reduce the energy consumption of commercial buildings, and specifically, and we've been getting a little bit into the residential side as well. And we lower energy costs, reduce the carbon footprint, enhance the indoor environmental quality for the occupants, optimize operations, and help increase property values. So these are all positive things that go into the bucket when we're looking at energy efficiency and how to do that. So we look at things through a whole building approach, and I think that's it's worthwhile to go through a little bit of this just to provide a little context. So we do deep green retrofits Essentially, we focus a lot on smart building control systems. And those are primarily, the way we look at them is primarily through the lens of energy efficiency, although that has started to change over the past few years into more of the resiliency aspects as well, which we can talk about some of the nuances. But we do a lot of HVAC mechanical upgrades, LED lighting upgrades, envelope improvements, and then we work with partners to implement solar and geothermal. And also, a lot of our clients are looking to electrify their buildings as the grid becomes cleaner, as it were. And we are sort of the third element of this puzzle. So we've discussed solar, and we've discussed battery backup, really crucial for resiliency. And the building efficiency component of it is sometimes overlooked. Historically, I've been in this business for 22 years now. And people pick up the phone, they call me oftentimes, and they're interested in solar, and that's phenomenal, and it's almost always for the right reasons, but when we start looking at dollar for dollar what's going on in their building, what we find is that their buildings are operating very inefficiently a lot of the time. And if we can reduce the amount of energy and load that the building has due to energy waste, then the greater impact the solar and the batteries are going to have on reducing the total energy usage of the building, and even getting close to and achieving net zero sometimes. So, there are projects that we're working on now that are utilizing renewables, and they're retrofit projects that are getting close to being net zero, which means that they don't consume any more energy than they generate. So energy efficiency is a huge component of trying to gain more resiliency. Just a brief history of smart building systems. So currently 80% of commercial building systems have zero climate management capabilities. So there's a ton of opportunity there for probably you if you manage or are involved in a commercial building. And almost 60% of the total energy consumed in Minnesota is lost through inefficiencies. So lots of room for improvement. A little bit of a history of the BAS systems. Back when they first started with pneumatic systems in the 1930s, buildings weren't designed to be efficient. They were just designed to be able to keep the occupants warm. And when AC was introduced, to keep them cool. Just, it didn't matter what the costs were. And then in the 1970s, when there was the oil embargo and whatnot, people really started to be concerned about energy efficiency from a security standpoint. And then in the 80s and 90s, it was really a heavy focus on energy efficiency for cost reduction and for climate-related issues and for security and occupant improvement. And the resiliency aspect and the indoor environmental quality has been relatively new as far as where we're starting to see the shift in a lot of our conversations, like we're having tonight. So we focus on HVA systems and how to make them more resilient. And the three main topics that we're going to continue to cover is just resiliency of the HVAC system. How will these operate if there is grid failure, or if we're operating under reduced operating conditions? And then energy demand shedding, just reducing the overall energy demand through control systems specifically, and then controlling the indoor environmental quality. And I'll explain what that means as we go through. So the systems that we are installing, they are wireless mesh networks that they create their own mesh network. So we're not completely reliant on cloud servers. It does connect to a cloud server, but even if the servers go down, if the building is disconnected, all the systems will continue to operate locally without interruption. And if one part of the building goes down, it will automatically self-heal and create its own, recreate its own network. They're completely autonomous, so you don't need to do anything. They're all controlled by your phone or the computer. So they're really what we would consider a smart building solutions. We've got controllers in the HVAC system that open and control dampers and valves. There's room thermostats throughout that are gauging anything from humidity levels to carbon dioxide levels to see how many occupants are in the room, whether they should bring in fresh air, VOCs, pollutants, things like that. And as we'll discuss a little bit later, there are also outdoor sensors because unfortunately, as there are more forest fires occurring, the air quality outside is sometimes worse than what it is inside. So we need to be now cognizant of outdoor air conditions as well as the indoor conditions. And here's just a graphic showing that everything is connected to the cloud. However, it also operates independently on its own. And this is just one of the systems that we install, which is called Pelican. There's also a system that we're involved with locally called 75F that some of you may or may not be familiar with. So historically, when we talk about grid interactive energy efficient buildings, or GEBs, these are buildings that are connected to the grid. And it's funny how things have changed. Just a few years ago, 5, 6 years ago, this is almost entirely what we are talking about, was grid connected energy demand shedding. In order to reduce brownouts on the grid, the utility companies can have some control over perhaps operations in your building so that they can reduce your demand in order to stabilize the grid. Well, that's great, but we need to be more concerned these days with, perhaps the grid going down, and how does that affect us, and what can we do at that point? So with building automation systems specifically, we're able to reduce through efficiency projects, we're able to reduce the total amount of energy load that you have in the building. So that's that first efficiency line. So we go down from the gray to the green. And then we try to shed those large peaks off, which further saves energy, but also reduces the amount of energy that we'll need during those high energy conditions. So a lot of times this occurs in the middle of summer when we have a large requirement to cool the building. And then load shifting, which we've talked a little bit about with the battery backup. So this is becoming more and more prominent as far as reducing your energy costs. And then modulating when we need energy and when we don't. So what that kind of looks like is, the first one is what we did almost primarily, which was just reducing your total energy consumption. And the second picture here in the middle is efficiency plus generation. So now we're able to, especially when that sun is shining, reduce down to being net neutral at some points during the day. And then if we are to combine all three, efficiency, generation, and then shedding or shifting energy loads, we're really reducing the amount of energy consumption that we'll need, which reduces the amount of solar panels and battery backup that we'll need as well. So these are all very much interconnected. Just a quick note, unfortunately, we have to think about the indoor environmental quality, and pathogen abatement is one of those things. As there are more, fires happening and more potential diseases occurring, if we can purify the air, these are just 4 different strategies that we are incorporating a lot into our buildings. Bipolar ionization, which I can answer questions about if people are interested. It's actually really fascinating stuff. Ultraviolet lighting, which kills all pathogens that come across its path. Higher filtration rates to reduce pathogens, and then filtration for both smoke and for pathogens. We do have in our systems something that's becoming more of interest, which is a shelter in place functionality. And so with building automation systems, you can get alerts on your phone, and it can go out to whomever persons in your building, facilities people, admin, that when we're testing the outside air for particles of particulate matter, ppms, when they are higher, that typically means that there is smoke. And if there is a significant amount of smoke in the area, the building will close all the dampers to reduce the air infiltration into the space to maintain a healthy indoor environment. So, that's something that is automatically occurring in our smart building solution. And that's pretty much it. I wanted to be very brief today, but if anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. That was great presentation. Yeah. Yeah, let's see. Are there questions in the chat? Things people are curious about, either for Jeremy or back on battery storage. If you are one of those people that just thinks, my offer of helping you get solar is pie in the sky, given that we only have about 8 weeks left, and you know how long it takes your congregation to make a decision. Energy efficiency incentives often are at the state and utility level. They're not going away. And so this would be a great time to start thinking about, let's open up some efforts in 2026 with Jeremy about looking at our building and starting to really examine our usage and how we can trim down that usage to reduce costs and reduce carbon. Because as Jeremy was saying, sometimes the upfront costs for those kind of usage efficiencies is lower total and has a better return on investment than solar does. Let's see, we've got a question in the chat about what is the cost of installing that kind of system for smart buildings, the smart technology. Yep.
Yeah, sure. So, the costs vary greatly, and it really depends on what kind of system you're putting in. However, an easy way to look at it is typically our building automation systems have a 3-year payback. So after rebates and grants, I can probably show too, like, maybe I'll reshare the screen real quickly.
Yep.
Sorry, one moment here. Okay, so I don't know if you can see my screen, but here is just a case study of a project in Minneapolis that we did. We did HVAC and LED lighting. And so in this case, 50% of the project costs were paid for with incentives. They reduced their energy costs by 45% across the board. And the savings were, so the total project cost was 103,000. Roughly half of that was building automation system, a building control system. So let's say $50,000. This is maybe a 25,000 square foot property. So $50,000. And then the savings was $18,000. So for lighting and controls, it was, I'm sorry, 51,000. There was $18,000 in savings. So this was a 2.8-year payback. So from an investment standpoint, pays itself off really quickly. And then you can invest in that solar and then move on to battery. There's kind of steps to this that make logical sense. And oftentimes people will really focus on the energy efficiency components first prior to solar.
Wow, that's remarkable.
Yeah. We've got some other case studies on geothermal and whatnot as well, but
There's
Yeah.
a question in the chat, Jeremy, about is this type of thinking being built into codes for new buildings? Are they required to have this kind of efficiency built in?
as far as efficiency is concerned, yes, they are. But you know,
And this smart technology, or
80% of the buildings that exist today are going to exist in 50 years from now. So, our new buildings that are going up, they do have code requirements. It's a state by state thing. So depending how, politically your state leans might really dictate the building codes and how efficient the new buildings are. But our focus is on existing buildings because that's where the inefficiencies primarily lie. And that's where most of us are going to be working and living out of, right? So there's just so much opportunity that is not touched by building codes on existing buildings. I don't know if that answers the question.
yeah, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but Rumbi, did you have your earlier question about, the centralized versus the single standalone when we were talking about batteries? Was that answered appropriately?
Actually, it was actually expanded, but I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and I'm trying to we've put solar in our home, but when we say standalone, we mean the solar panels on the home. We do not have what we have here in the US, like you have a grid, you are in a village and you have nothing and there's no government subsidy. You're totally on your own and trying to figure out, okay, what kind of solar are we going to put? What kind of battery? And it's still a nascent technology that we are getting from China, Canada, and the installers are still very new. So as you were giving this presentation, Cece, in my head, I was trying to marry the system here and what I am experiencing in
Yeah.
yeah. And even
Um,
the terminologies are different. So I was trying to understand, but I really loved this presentation because sometimes you feel, okay, I think we are done. And then you are told, oh, now you need an inverter. Oh, now you need this. Oh, it does not work like, and then it's so
yeah,
frustrating. Yeah,
yeah,
you just want to say, people, can you just tell me what I
yeah,
need? What is the best? You know, instead of
yeah.
piecemeals.
Yeah, so I'm following now. You're talking about like an off-grid system, a system that's not tied to
Yes.
a utility grid. Um,
Mhm.
we can certainly help you with that if you want to reach out. But their battery storage is kind of a need if you're off grid, because if you're off grid, you need that power source from the batteries to speak to the inverter, so that it has a reference voltage to stay powered. And there's a ton of really good products available for off grid systems. I would recommend you look into Victron. I'll put it in the chat, the name.
Okay.
They are like the industry standard for off grid. But you'll need a battery system of some sort, and you'll need the solar inverter. It would probably make sense to do a DC coupled system if you're starting from scratch. But I can also share with Buff some info on off grid systems that he could maybe send out after the call too. But is that helpful?
Very helpful. And I'm just
Okay.
curious, do we have off-grid here in the US? In
Yeah,
rural?
some people will go off grid, rural areas sometimes, and also like you see that a lot of people's cabins are like summer homes that are way up north, or people that have property like in the wilderness in Canada, they'll also be off grid a lot of the time. I mean, you can do it anywhere technically, but we do work on projects that are not in the US. We do international solar and battery storage. So we'd love to work with you on that if you're looking for some support there and just engineering services and whatnot. But I do have a coworker, Amir, who is very into the off grid stuff and he would love to talk to you. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. I also just want to comment to everyone that Jeremy's points are all really, really important. If you start with what he talked about, you're going to get the best value out of all of this stuff. And I think often people jump to solar before considering, what else can we do now to make solar more beneficial for us? And, the more efficient your building is, the cheaper the renewable system you need to install, smaller it'll be. So I think that his slide was really important for people to think about.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. A shout out there to Nick at Native Sun. We're another great partner in Minnesota. Glad to have you on the call, and it's good to see so many of you. Thanks especially to our guests, Jeremy Davis from MNIPL Energy and Cecelia Hartigan from Apadana Energy. Thank you both for your expertise and sharing all that information. I hope this has been helpful. We'll continue to delve into building and power as items of those 5 pillars of resilience that we're looking at. So watch for additional webinars coming in 2026 on this topic. If you watch for that email that I'll send out with the links shared by our guests and others, and let us know how we can help and help you build the resilience hub that you want to build. Thank you. Everybody have a good evening.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you so
Bye,
much.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.